So the doctrine we're looking at is this. You can express it very simply. When this is, that is. Or when this arises, that arises. When this is not, that is not. Or when this ceases, that ceases. Simple process of conditioning, of causality. I'll give you a trite example. If there is a big dark cloud, rain falls. Because rain falls, the surface of the road becomes slippery. Because of the slipperiness of the road, a car gets into a skid. Because the car gets into a skid, someone gets hurt. And you can reverse this. If there was no rain, then the road would not become slippery. If the road did not become slippery, the car would not get into a skid. If the car didn't get into a skid, then nobody would get hurt. You can see here a simple process of causation taking place. And this is going to be used to explain the arising of dukkha and the cessation of dukkha, and also the arising of an individual and the life of an individual. When the Buddha's attendant, personal attendant, dear Ananda, learned about this doctrine, he said, "Sir, it seems to me that this doctrine is as clear can be. It is quite simple to understand." And the Buddha said, "No, Ananda, it is not simple to understand. It is not as clear can be. It is profound. And it is through not understanding, not penetrating this doctrine, that the world resembles a tangled ball of thread, a bird's nest, a thicket of sedge or reed, and that man does not escape from the lower states of existence, from the course of woe and perdition, suffering from the round of rebirth." So that put Venerable Ananda in his place. I love Venerable Ananda because he was one of the main individuals in the Buddha's lifetime who was not yet enlightened. All the other people we come across, Sariputta, Moggallana, Kassapa, so on and so forth, they're all enlightened beings. They're all a totally different level from ordinary people. But Ananda has the human characteristics. He is the one who does ask questions. He is the one who breaks down and weeps at the prospect of the Buddha's death. He is the one who, in my opinion, is the one we can relate to most easily because he's not yet enlightened. He becomes enlightened after the Buddha dies, but that's, as I say, after his death. So you have Venerable Ananda's view of dependent origination, that it is easy to understand. But then we have Venerable Buddhaghosa. He was the great commentator on the Buddha's teachings in about 500 AD. He said that when he comes to explain this doctrine, he said, "I feel as if I had fallen into the deep ocean." very deep stuff. So you can take Buddhaghosa's view, or you can take Ananda's view, and there we go. Now you'll need a copy of this white sheet of paper. We are indebted to the Tibetans for producing this diagram, although this particular one has been made in the 20th century by, I think, a Westerner who has incorporated a few Western or 20th century items into it. To begin with, we're interested in the wheel, the circumference. And this is why it's called the wheel of life and death. And you will see that along the circumference there are 12 linked windows or pictures, like sausages. And we can start at just past the 12 o'clock position. We're going to go round here. So the first thing we have is the condition called avidya. We have the English word vision from the same root. Vision, vidya, seeing. Avidya, not seeing. That's another word for ignorance. Ignorance or non-understanding. We are, until we become enlightened, in one way or another, subject to ignorance, this cloud which obscures our vision, which prevents us from seeing things clearly and from acting properly, acting rightly. And so it is because of ignorance that a chain of events is set in motion. In the diagram we have a picture of a blind person bent over, walking with the aid of a stick. The person cannot see, so that is the lack of vision, avidya. And because of ignorance, we perform actions. Yes.
Can we take these?
You certainly can do. You can even take a colouring pencil and colour it any way you like. We perform all sorts of actions out of ignorance. And these actions generate karma. Only an enlightened being who has achieved understanding does not create fresh karma. But all of us, every moment of the day, we are generating karma by our actions, mental, verbal or bodily actions, which are based on ignorance or non-understanding. Because we have the intention is there. And this gives rise to what are called Sankara. Sankara is a word which occurs in several different places with slightly different meanings. In this case, it means volitional actions. Actions which are going to have an effect. And you can see in the illustration there is a potter. making pots. And this is a good illustration because some of the pots are good pots, well-made pots, and some are not good pots, badly made pots. And that is how our actions are. Some are skillful and some are unskillful. So these actions can manifest in all sorts of ways. They can just be in the mind, but they can also be carried forward into verbal and physical activity. And the effects of this is to bring about what is called Vijnana, or relinking consciousness. Vijnana in some contexts means simply consciousness. In this particular context, it refers specifically to the consciousness, the mind moment that arises at the moment of death and which conditions the first thought moment or mind moment of the next life. The illustration we have is of a monkey jumping from the branch of a dead tree to a living tree, similar to the idea of a relinking consciousness. This moment, it's not something that exists a long time, it's rather like a spark jumping from one point to another. Its only function is to start off the new life that's coming into existence. Any form of consciousness only lasts for a tiny, tiny, tiny split second. It doesn't exist for longer than that. But it plays its role in conditioning the next moment of consciousness, which then conditions the next moment, and the next, and the next, and the next. So consciousness is not something which exists the whole time, unbroken and continuously. Consciousness is constantly arising and passing away, millions of times in a second, so rapidly that we cannot see these individual moments. But the picture here is showing us that because of ignorance, we perform actions which generate karma. And it is the karmic energy which propels life, the reproductive energy, the generative karma, which propels life during this particular existence and also propels another form of life. After this particular body comes to an end, there's another form of life that arises after that. So this is the driving force that drives on existence. So this is the manifestation of a moment of consciousness, a vijnana, which plays the function of triggering off, of sparking off the new life form. Depending on that, two things arise: nama and rupa. A few moments ago I mentioned to you that the Buddha had talked about a being as being made up of 5 aggregates. And the 5 aggregates are nama, there are 4 kinds of nama, and 1 kind of rupa. So nama is mentality, rupa materiality. So these come into existence due to the re-linking consciousness. That the Vijnana causes the arising of nama and rupa. And in the illustration, you have a boat and a boatman. This illustrates that these two are interdependent. Once they have arisen, the boat cannot go anywhere without the boatman. And the boatman cannot go anywhere without the boat. So mind and matter are interdependent. Another analogy is of two people. One person is blind and the other person has a physical handicap and cannot walk. By themselves, neither of them can go anywhere. But if they establish interdependence, the handicapped person can sit on the shoulders of the blind person, and then they can move around. The blind person can walk, and the other person is giving him directions. This way, that way. In the same way, the boat depends upon the boatman, and the boatman depends upon the boat. And nama and rupa depend upon each other. Is this making any sense? Please say if it isn't. So we've now got 4 of these links which have been established. And then, depending on nama and rupa, that is the body and the mind, there can arise 6 salayatana. The salayatana are what we call sense bases. This is the organ which can receive the appropriate object for that particular sense. So we talk about an eye base, ear base, nose base, tongue base, body base, and in Buddhism, mind is also considered as a sense, and so you have the mind base. So each of these organs can receive its own appropriate object. The eye cannot receive sound. The tongue cannot receive vision, objects you can see. But each of them can receive its own particular object. The illustration we have here is of a house with 6 windows, which represents these 6 senses. And this particular house is meant to be empty. Just as there is no owner, there is no I, there is no controller, there is no self, there is no soul inside us, so there is no inhabitant living inside the house. What you may be beginning to perceive is that in each of these cases, each of these links, there is just the link. There isn't somebody behind the link. There isn't an owner. There isn't a controller. Nobody in charge. Nobody who receives the results of different things happening. All there is are these links arising and then causing something else, and they pass away, and the next thing goes on and causes something else. So we have all these links, and in this case we now have the sense bases. The sense bases can then do their work, which is to come into contact with their own appropriate object. So the I can come into contact with some visible object. The tongue can come into contact with something that can be tasted, and so on, for all of these sense bases. So the illustration which we have is contact. It is two people, there is contact between them. And we can also talk about contact with the other bases. This is a contact of the body base, but you can also have contact with any of the other senses. Now this process of contact will then give rise, phassa is contact, number 6. Number 7, Vedana. Vedana is sometimes translated as feeling. But feeling is rather a complex emotion. Here I think it's better to use the word sensation. When contact takes place between a sense base and its object, then a sensation arises. If you put your foot onto a nail, your body base has come into contact with an appropriate object, and then a sensation arises. The nail goes into your foot. In this case, we have a picture. Yes, we have a picture of a person with an arrow in his eye. I think we can agree that that probably causes some kind of sensation to arise, and we can get sensation appropriate for each of the sense bases. And then the next event is to react to this sensation. The sensation may be a very pleasant sensation. If it's something that you like to taste, the sensation arises very pleasant. I like this. And you can see here there's a man with food and drink laid out before him, and this is what he wants. He's got desire for these things. Then the next link was clinging. And there's a man here clinging onto fruit from a tree. His basket is already full of fruit. He can't put any more fruit in his basket, but even so, he's still trying to grab onto more, hold on to more of the fruit. And that illustrates one of the features, one of the characteristics of craving and clinging. You cannot satisfy it. There's always a desire for something. The Buddha said that this is like pouring water into the ocean. The ocean will never overflow. The ocean will never say, okay, enough, I'm satisfied now. You just go on and on and on and on and on. And so this, in turn, the clinging gives rise to bhava, becoming, which is represented by the pregnant woman. And then the bhava causes, number 11, jati. Jati is birth. That is the natural result of bhava. And then birth gives rise to jara marana. The actual Pali term is longer, but it is all the things we find in the Buddhist description of dukkha. Birth is dukkha, old age, sickness, death, pain, grief, sorrow, lamentation, despair. All these things arise in dependence upon birth. They are the natural and unavoidable consequence of birth. So these 12 links can also be gone through in the reverse direction. That's why I put the numbers on the right side in the reverse order. So you can say jara marana. Old age, sickness, death, etc., etc. What is the cause for the arising of these? Or dependent upon what do these things arise? They depend upon jati, birth. If there was no birth, there would be no old age, sickness and death. And what is the cause for birth? Depending on what does birth arise, it arises depending on bhava, becoming. And what does bhava depend upon? It arises in dependence upon upadana, clinging. And clinging is dependent upon tanha, craving. Craving is dependent upon Vedana, sensation. And sensation arises in dependence upon contact. And contact depends upon the sense bases. Salayatana. The sense bases depend upon nama and rupa, body and mind. And these sense bases arise in dependence upon the relinking thought moment, the consciousness that sparks between the dying being and the new life form about to arise. In other contexts, Vijnana refers to consciousness in general, but in this particular context, it is the relinking consciousness. And what is the cause for the relinking consciousness? It is volitional activities which generate karma, the energy. And what does that depend upon? It depends upon ignorance. So you can go clockwise or anti-clockwise around this wheel. And that gives us an explanation for how an individual arises, and also for how dukkha arises. But that is not sufficient. There's got to be some benefit from this. All the Buddha's teachings were given with a clear goal, that is the eventual eradication of dukkha. So somehow we have to bring this whole cycle to an end. We have to break one of the links in this chain. Which one? Avijja? How are we going to get rid of avijja? Some links you can't break. As long as there is birth, there will be old age, sickness and death. Inevitable. You can't stop it. The weakest place is between Vedana and Tanha. Normally, we react to sensations automatically. I like this, I don't like that. Instant decision. But we can train the mind through the practice of meditation to observe these sensations as they arise, and simply to observe them, not to react to them, just to watch them. You can be sitting on your cushion and a pain starts up in your knee. The usual impulse is to say, ow, that's hurting, I'm not sitting here anymore. Stand up and walk around. But with practice, with training, you can just realize that this pain is not something solid. It doesn't have an independent existence. And if you watch it without reacting to it, without developing aversion to it, the pain may actually become less and go away. Whether it becomes less and goes away is not so important. The important thing is not to react to the pain with aversion. If you're interested to pursue the practice of meditation, there's a very good book written by a monk called Gunaratana, Venerable Gunaratana. Mindfulness in Plain English. And he has a very nice little sentence in there. He's talking about the practice of sitting meditation. And he says, pain is inevitable. Suffering is not. You see the distinction he's drawing? That sooner or later you're going to get a pain somewhere or other. But you don't have to make that pain into suffering. The Buddha talked about two levels the physical pain and the mental pain. In the unenlightened mind, as soon as there is physical pain, we build onto that aversion to the physical pain, and we get mental pain as well. But that doesn't necessarily have to happen. We can try to observe the pain as simply a passing experience with which we do not identify. We just allow it to be. We just watch it objectively. And if we do that, then tanha does not arise. If tanha does not arise, upadana does not arise. If upadana doesn't arise, then bhava doesn't arise. And the whole pack of cards collapses. So the whole purpose of this is to try to show us a way to reduce and eventually to eliminate dukkha. This is the whole idea, is to try to help us to benefit all the teachings of the Buddha. He said, just as the mighty ocean has but one taste, the taste of salt, meaning wherever you take water out of the ocean, it's got the same flavor. So has his mighty teaching but one taste, the taste of deliverance. Everything he taught, everything he said, is directed towards understanding and eliminating dukkha. That's the whole purpose of the Buddha's teachings. This is not some intellectual explanation of the world just to give us a kind of nice idea we can discuss one evening and chat about and think that's very clever and so on and so forth. This is meant to be applied in our life. We are meant to use this for benefit. That's just the same as every other part of the Buddha's teachings. So the Paticca-Samuppada is central to the Buddha's teachings. As I said, it's not just a little optional extra. It is very much the essence of the teaching. And it is only when you think about it a bit more you may come to realize that the situation is actually very complicated. According to this little chart, one cause arises and produces one effect. But actually, in everyday activities, there are many causes producing many effects. It's far more complicated than this little chart is showing us. But for purposes of teaching, this is how it is explained. Before we look at the rest of the chart, anybody want to ask anything? You're looking troubled. No. Yes. Okay. If you look at the center of the circle, the bullseye, you will see three animals: a cockerel, a snake, and a pig. These represent the three root defilements in our mind: lobha, dosa, moha. Greed, hatred, ignorance. Greed, the cockerel, represents that. Hatred, the snake, and the pig, non-understanding, delusion, ignorance. These are the three qualities which are present in everyone's mind to a greater or lesser extent. One person might have lots of greed but not so much hatred. Another person might have a lot of hatred and not so much greed. The difference between us is only one of degree, but those three qualities are present in the minds of every unenlightened being. At the achievement of enlightenment, those are totally eradicated, never to come back, replaced by the opposite of greed, which is non-attachment, generosity. The opposite of hatred is loving kindness, goodwill, compassion. And the opposite of ignorance is wisdom or understanding. And that is really the essence of the whole of the Buddhist path, is the purification of the mind of these three unwholesome qualities and the development of their opposites. Just outside that little center circle, there's another ring which is partly having a black background and partly having a white background. And you can see beings going round in this circle. There are four kinds of being. If you start at the 12 o'clock position, where the black background starts, there's a being lying on his back and then tumbling down at the 3 o'clock position, upside down. Everybody see what I'm talking about? So one kind of being is born in the dark and stays in the dark. That means born into unfavorable or unhappy circumstances. Maybe born into poverty, maybe born into a dysfunctional family, maybe born with handicaps, mental or physical handicaps, born with a lot of problems. And in his life, he makes no spiritual progress. So he stays in the dark. And then there are beings who are born in the dark but are going to the light. That means beings born again into unhappy or unfavorable circumstances, but they are not being controlled by their circumstances. They are making an effort, and they are making progress in spiritual development. So, although they are born in the dark, they are going towards the light. Then the third form of being is born in the light and is staying in the light. Beings born into favorable circumstances, full health of body and mind, maybe physical circumstances are favorable, there may be no poverty, no sickness, loving relationships, and they are using this good opportunity to make progress on the spiritual path. So they are staying in the light, led by a monk who is carrying a lantern. And then the fourth kind of being, not so clearly illustrated here, is the being born in the light, but is going to the dark. Born into favorable circumstances, but he goes off the straight and narrow path. He goes off into all sorts of unskillful living. Does and says things which are not wholesome. So, although he had a good start in life, he's gone off the track. And he is deteriorating spiritually, going into the dark. And between that ring and the 12 links on the circumference, there are illustrations of some of the different planes of existence. I mentioned that there are 31 different planes of existence. We can't get all 31 planes illustrated, and in fact, all the planes illustrated here are in the 11 parts of the form sphere. If you have your chart still of the 31 planes of existence, you'll see the first 11 are made up of hell realms, the human plane, and some heavenly realms. And this is what is being illustrated here. If you... where do we start? Let's start at 6 o'clock. These are hell realms, places of suffering. You can see beings impaled on spikes. You can see a big bird tearing out the entrails of somebody. You can see beings being washed away in a river. And then giant maggots eating somebody. And then, as a 20th century element, you've got a railway line leading to what I think is a gas chamber. So, I'm not sure what it looks like. I don't know if it's a soldier or what. He's got what looks like a frying pan in his hand. And there's a skeletal figure looking up. I don't know what that represents. Maybe you have an idea, but could be. I think it's left to our imaginations. But this is representation of a realm of suffering. If you go anti-clockwise to the next realm, you see represented another realm of suffering called the hungry ghost. Hungry ghosts are typically depicted with huge bellies, but very, very, very thin necks. So they cannot take in enough food or drink to satisfy their hunger. So that again is a place of suffering. Above them, the realm we call demigods or titans. Existence in that plane would not actually be too bad, except they are insatiably jealous of the next plane in the anti-clockwise direction, which is the true heavenly planes. You can see the heavenly planes are represented by religious buildings. And the cause of the jealousy is a tree that separates these two realms. The tree has its roots in the demigods realm, but unfortunately, the fruit is on the other side. The fruit is falling into the heavenly planes. So the demigods are unhappy because their fruit is not coming to them, it's going to the heavenly planes, and therefore they are jealous and unhappy. If you now go round in a clockwise direction to the 8 o'clock position, see another unhappy plane, and that is the animal world. And if you live in the animal world, you may be flying through the sky and somebody pulls out a gun and shoots at you. You may have a lion jump on your back. You may be hunted by somebody else with a rifle. You may be made into a beast of burden, pulling a plough and whipped. You may be a little fish being eaten by a bigger fish. You may be caught on a fishing line by a fisherman. These are all ways of representing the animal plane, which is generally regarded as a plane of suffering. And then between the animal plane and the heavenly plane, in the 11 o'clock position, you have the human plane. And you can see there's a mixture of happy experiences and unhappy experiences. There's a bar, which is regarded by Buddhists as not a place to delight in. There's a tank. There are soldiers and trees which have been blown to smithereens. I think it's a baby waving his arms out of a pram. There's a man bent over with a walking stick. Hospital. Graveyard. That's the unhappy experiences which we meet in the human plane. But we also have churches or mosques, other religious buildings, and we have a group of people sitting at the feet of the Buddha, hearing him teach. And that is why the human plane is a very important plane. It is a mixture. We have happiness. We like the happiness. We want to improve on the happiness. We want to develop our happiness. But we also have unhappiness. And we want to get away from the unhappiness. We want to eliminate it. And it is in the human plane that we can hear the Buddha's teachings. If we are born in one of these other planes, we can't hear the Buddha's teachings. We can't practice the Buddha's teachings. Once we get into one of the hell realms, it's very, very difficult to get out. But if we follow the Buddha's teachings when we're in the human plane, you will see that there is a path. Lotus flowers. 8 lotus flowers, which symbolize the noble eightfold path, leading up to another 8-spoked wheel. That is the exit from the cyclic existence. By practicing the Buddha's teachings, we are able to get away from samsara. And standing outside all of this, top right-hand side, is a picture of the Buddha. His hand is in the no fear mudra, saying nothing to fear. His teachings will help you and protect you. And he's also have the other arm out. That's, I think, in the teaching posture. And then this whole picture, all up to the, the circumference of the wheel, is in the jaws of a demon. You can see his mouth or the face at the top at the 12 o'clock position. At the 6 o'clock position, you can see his tail. The tail has no beginning. You can't actually show that in a physical depiction, but the idea is that this existence of samsara, the Buddha said even he could not see back to a time when it began. And this demon has on his head a crown with the words, "Impermanence devours all worlds." So everything which is gripped in his jaws is impermanent. Nothing lasts. Nothing can be relied on. Nothing is a source of permanent happiness. And further up on the crown there are 5 skulls. That was the Buddha's analysis of a being into 5 aggregates, 5 khandhas. So each khandha is represented by a skull. So there you have it. That is samsara as imagined by the artist who drew this. It is trying to explain to us part of the Buddhist cosmology, at least some of the planes of existence, and it is also trying to show us the cycling around in samsara, these 12 links in the chain that just go round and round and round and round and round and round and round until or unless we take action to get out of all this. If we are happy just cycling along in samsara from one existence to another, then we don't have to do anything. This will just go on and on and on and on for an unbelievably long time, and has been going on for an unbelievably long time. But if we feel that this present existence is not satisfactory, then it is for us to take up the practices recommended by the Buddha, which will lead to greater happiness in this life, greater happiness in future lives, and eventually the attainment of complete release from all this samsaric existence, the state of Nibbana, the state of perfect happiness, the state of perfect purity, attained by him at the age of 35 and by his followers at that time and also in the centuries since he died.
Is that one I think I've read in Buddhism